Hi everyone, I'm Caroline Hill. I'm Editor-in-Chief of Legal IT Insider. Welcome to Charting Change in Legal, and I'm here with
Ari Kaplan. Welcome. Hi everyone. I'm Ari. I'm an analyst that covers legal, and so excited to be here with you, Caroline. So thanks.
I like the way we always start this so maturely, which is just gives away our personality. So what do you want to talk about this week, Ari?
I think this week we should talk about the events that are taking place. This is a very busy period all over the world in legal. The ALA conference was this week here in the US. The CLOC Global Institute is taking place next week. You've been at least one event. I think there's a lot of work and focus on pushing legal forward that tends to be coming out at this period of the year. So it's a very exciting moment, I think.
An exciting time. Yeah. So I chaired a panel this week, actually, just 2 days ago. I've kind of lost track because we have so many bank holidays in the UK at the moment, and obviously then there was the King's coronation, so I've kind of lost track of what day it is. But yeah, this week I chaired a panel at British Legal Technology Forum where it was a really fun topic, and we were talking about if we could go back to it was called Back to the Future. Does the legal sector need the DeLorean? Which was a really fun title. And we talked about all of the things that the panel would change if they could go back 10 years. And what was really interesting about it is that a lot of the things came down to people. And I know that you and I, we spend our lives talking about technology. The industry listens a lot, wants to talk about technology. But the people on the panel, who are all well known in the sector, said that they would, for example, so there's Nathan Hayes, who's IT director at Osborne Clarke. He said that in order to really affect change, that he would train lawyers to actually to act in an entirely different way, and to understand the way that they needed to change in order to affect real change. And Daniel Pollock, who you know, who's ex-DWF, ex-DWA, CIO, also said that he would train lawyers as business people. It was really interesting. So we did talk a bit about technology, but and there was April Brousseau, who's head of research and development at Clifford Chance. She said that she would help. Still help, but she would have much more focus on people's roles, like creating the new roles that bear in mind we were going back 10 years. She would have a much earlier focus on new roles like legal project management and all of that kind of stuff. And then Mo Ajaz, who is ex-GC of National Grid, now he's got his own consultancy. He said that he would stop general counsel coming in before they've had training to actually run an in-house legal department, so that they came in with the requisite knowledge in how in-house teams should be run. So I don't know what your thoughts are on any of that. There was a lot of a squishing in the DeLorean, that's for sure. But it was really fun to have those people conversations.
Well, in that regard, it's interesting to me because I feel like I'm less interested in technology and more interested in process. And in fact, I sort of geeked out at the beginning of the year. I had a conversation. I remember having a conversation with my wife, who's always like, oh my gosh, what are we going to talk about now? And I said, I think my word for the year is process. And she was like, how did I get involved in this conversation? Like, why am I sitting here? What are you talking? Why are we having a conversation about process? But most often I'll try to think about, like, I'm reading a book. I've read pretty much finished reading a book called The 5 a.m. Club. And just for anybody who's listening, let me just give it right to you. You don't have to waste any time on it. Basically, if you wake up at 5 a.m., everything's better. And so but the idea is, what is your strategy? Like, what is your process? Can you build in tools? So I think, okay, I want to be better with my time management process. I track my time using an app, and I really like it. It's really helpful. It helps me gauge how much time, what the value is of where I'm spending my time. And I think that people are starting to come around to leading with something other than technology. And I think the GPT models, there's a lot of discussion now about not mixing up what ChatGPT is versus GPT versus large language models versus, traditional AI or predictive coding, or however we're designating whatever it is we're talking about. But I think whatever those things are and however we're defining them or referring to them, that is driving a lot of this. Well, the technology clearly works and it's really impressive. how does it fit into what I need? How does it solve a problem that I have? And I think that goes back to Mo's point that you mentioned, who I'm obviously a fan, and the idea of understanding where we are coming from before you get here is really helpful to us, because then you can kind of push us forward as opposed to create this very misaligned and fragmented process.
Yes, I think I pity your wife a tiny weeny bit.
Ah,
Like,
so did so many people, as does my wife.
I love you around your dinner table. So
But
let's
she's
talk.
stuck. We've been together for
Let's talk.
28 years. There's no going back, thankfully.
Let's talk some more about process. So we
Although
did.
if she had a DeLorean, now I'm thinking about it, I don't know. Things would be very different. She would pay a lot of money for that car.
So we did on my panel talk about process as well. You'll be pleased to hear. And they were talking about things like because again, that's the three parts of the triangle, right?
Yes,
There's
of
obviously
course,
you got
right.
people, process, technology, and Daniel Pollock, I started off by saying, we've come to this realization about this triangle. How long ago do you think that happened in terms of realizing it's, very much that three-part equation? And Daniel said, I don't really think that we have still, so which is quite interesting, that there's still too much focus on technology. And to your point,
it's like we're all running within the triangle. We're just keep running to different corners. And I think that that's part of the process. If you can imagine a visual, I like to visualize things. Just imagine we all settle in one area, then we pop over another area, and we pop over another area. And so but I love this conversation. What's exciting is at this time of year, there was discussion about this at the ALA conference. There's discussion at the conference that you attended. There's going to be discussion about it at CLOC. There's going to be lots of discussion about it at Lexpo in June. So you're bringing together the smartest folks that you've experienced, the people that I've been talking to, and not just learning, but getting a sense of how are they applying, where are they making mistakes, where do they have freedom to make mistakes, what's the threshold for applying something and making a mistake. I mean, I'll tell you that I just finished a report that came out at the ALA conference this week about leadership and what the challenges are for law firms. Now, I really focused on mid-sized law firms in the U.S. This was a consortium of companies that supported it, Affinity Consulting, I Manage, and SurePoint. And the objective was to try to understand what are the challenges of leadership beyond technology. There were clearly lots of issues. What kind of training do we provide? How advanced is the technology? But much more of it was fundamental, like how do we change the nature of the way lawyers bill? How do we just run our business more effectively? How do we provide training in a hybrid world? There are lots of organizations still struggling with getting people back into an office on a consistent basis, not necessarily every day, but on a basis that allows for collaboration and strong work products. So I think that, it's an exciting moment to try to figure out what's worked, what hasn't. Let's share some best practices.
Was there any sense of, so one of the things that I struggle with slightly, so we've had a great leap post-pandemic in terms of technological advances that at a rate that we haven't before. Everyone can kind of congratulate themselves. And now my question is, you've now got generative AI, right? So which is going to be the next sort of leap. But my question around leadership, right, is that we haven't really seen much change in terms of law firm leadership. There's sort of the same sort of structure, not always in the case. And I just wonder if there needs to be more diversity of leadership in order to really facilitate the types of changes that are going to happen going forward. Like we can talk about change and we can be excited about change, and people are. I think law firms really are. Some firms are doing some really interesting stuff, but in order to create substantive change, like the sort of thing that I was saying with my panel, right, going back 10 years, they wish they'd, enable people to sort of understand this, that, the other. With the current leadership structure being the same, I just wonder how much change we can really affect.
Well, this is such an interesting point because it kind of brings together two things that I started working on at least a decade ago. One of them was about how to attain and keep your seat at the table. And it was mostly focused on administrative leadership in law firms, right? Law firms are businesses that are often run by heroes that aren't practicing law, executive directors. You see now the heightened role of a chief operating officer in a law firm. They're CEOs of law firms. And so the question has always been, how do you get that seat at the table so that there's a management meeting and you're there? And one of the ways is to just know the story, know the data, understand the facts, be able to paint a picture that everybody can understand. About a decade ago, you saw this conversation taking place in corporations and in legal departments, right? They called that person the chief of staff, the COO of the law department, now head of legal operations. And so in CLOC next week, you'll see kind of the emergence. This is in many ways a very interesting period because it's been about a decade that this has kind of been an accepted thing. But I wrote an article in the summer of 2012 about this stuff. And so, which is cool. I think it's cool that I've been tracking it for a long, long time, but you're seeing that. And so with generative AI, like I'm actually interviewing today, although this might not be publicized until beyond today, but I'm interviewing the new VP of generative AI at Latera, who was with HG. This has been announced, right? Greg Coates is now the VP of generative AI. And we are going to have a conversation on the virtual lunch about the role, but the mission. How do you get the most value out of some of these things so that law firms can then create more value for their clients? And one of the things that people can do is how do I get a seat at the table now? And generative AI and the other ways that we're describing automation and technology that enhances the work product of a legal professional is that way. And we've talked about this for many, many days on the virtual lunch because our theme this month is practical AI. But what can you do as an individual proactively to position yourself such that someone says, I want you to be in the room with us. You can explain it. You speak that language. And so the language keeps changing a little bit, right? Over the years, there's always been this joke about, do you speak geek? And right, I mean, I think Judge Peck coined that in terms of bring your geek to court and let us know how this process works, because otherwise it's just a black box to many people. Well, we are at another crossroads. And if you're that person that understands that information, young, old, experienced, wherever you're coming from, it's a wonderful opportunity. And you could really teach yourself these things. There's lots of ways to learn it, and there are lots of opportunities to see how it's applied. So I really encourage people to take advantage of that. Again, wherever you are in your career, you could be at the later stages of your career, the super early stages of your career. It'll be agnostic from that perspective, because if you know it and understand it, you're of value and can help your organization, corporate legal department, law firm, really service provider push into the future and really make a difference.
Yeah. I think also the management, they need to, I mean, it's really interesting. So with the new breed of like lawyer techie, that I think that perhaps that I think that's going to create a really interesting dynamic in terms of what that means for management. But I think that the executive also need to think about, right, how do we create space at that table? Who do we need to train up? Not just in, for example, it might be generative AI, but in like you said about understanding the story, understand that I think they need to be thinking right now, about training people to be managers. I've spoken to plenty of IT directors who about sort of they sort of describe it as be careful what you wish for, because they were sort of in charge of the hardware and then suddenly they're expected to be sort of talking about strategy, and they said, do you know what, this was actually not originally part of our remit, right? We were not there to be the strategist. And I was saying, yeah, but don't you want to be on the board? And some people do, some people don't, right? So, and that's just a fact. But but I think that every law firm now needs a head of IT on the board, my personal opinion. And when I was doing, we were updating our UK top 200 of which firms use what systems. It's amazing how many firms do not have anyone in IT on their board, right? Still, the vast majority do not. And I found that really interesting. So it's a case of, from both sides. Like, I agree, there's huge opportunities, but also I think from firms' perspective, if you're talking about leadership and taking that rounded view on what does leadership mean and what should we be doing in order to, we're going to doing that really confusing thing in Back to the Future, but you then go forward, and then that's where people like me just lose the plot completely as to what year they're in. And then you give up or you fall asleep on the sofa. So they need to think ahead, right? And just go, right, we've got this huge sea change here, right? We need in leadership, there are plenty of willing, excited people out there, right? There are plenty of people who have the potential to be promoted, right?
Yeah.
They need to think right, very strategically. I think what we need leaders who really understand this stuff. I personally think, and we need them to be, as you describe it, have a seat at the table, and be really informing the strategy, because this is real sea change stuff potentially, including both negatively and positively. So could be, you don't want to be one of those firms if we're talking about Gen AI specifically. And I'm having a lunch with Greg as well, by the way, which is quite fun.
Well, but the one thing that I think is really important is that we push past the hype phase. It's a natural progression and we need to be in that phase. But as we push past it, there will be a greater level of trust. And it's only with that level of trust that really, really change happens. So luckily, there are several reports that I've been working on, that I am working on, that hopefully will at least just give people a sense of what the perception, the sort of overall perception is, where there are gaps to fill, and then give them a chance to fill it. My report next week with Simplify a Clock, which will be introduced then, not only, first of all, I'm super proud of this research. I interviewed 50 heads of legal operations, at large organizations. Really, really proud of it. But not only that, as part of the report's campaign, I actually was able to speak with several of them on the record. All of my research is anonymous. I don't mention names of companies, names of individuals, but in this case, there are a number of folks who were sharing their thoughts on the record about where they see contract analytics headed, how they see AI affecting their approach to gathering data, sharing metrics with their team. And I think that those perspectives will help inform others and give them a opportunity to benchmark, but also help the people who are creating the technology realize, what, we're creating a solution to a problem that actually isn't what people are struggling with. Let's try to refocus. Everybody is now introducing some module that reflects the hype, and a lot of the folks that I've talked to are not actually ready to use that. They just don't see where it is. Their process is not aligned with whatever that technology is. And once we can figure out how we put that together, that's going to be a very exciting point. And I like the fact that you have these events, because they discuss it. And a lot of these things are U.S. centric. When I'm at Lexpo, it'll be very European centric. And so I think that combining those perspectives is going to be super valuable.
I know the report's going to have its probably big release at CLOC, but what were the sort of key findings? Was there anything really interesting in terms of high level findings from it? It sounds like it's a really great achievement at interviewing that number of people for it.
I appreciate that, and it's a combination of hustle and generosity of the people who I reached out to. I have to say, they were very kind to take my call on a Friday afternoon or whatever, and would be willing to schedule time with me, and easier, in fact, because it's U.S. based. I'm working on a new report, speaking with in-house counsel globally, and so I've had several calls in the middle of the night, or way earlier.
People in the middle of the night again, Ari. Like, go, hey,
well,
I've been to talk to you about process.
On their time.
I'm in bed.
I'll do what you need it. So if you're in Singapore, I'm happy to talk to you at 1 a.m. if that's convenient and it's after lunch for you. So, but the thing that has been really interesting, just to gathering all these perspectives, I'm just thinking about it, between my e-discovery and filter report, this Simplify report, and the consortium report of leadership, and this other thing, I've interviewed at least 125 in-house professionals over the last month or two, and then certainly about 50 different law firm leaders. So there's a lot of perspectives happening now, and I think that the unifying point is, I'm not sure exactly where we are, but I'm much more willing, and I think my team is much more willing, to accept that we don't know and to listen to what others are doing to help kind of forge a path forward. And I think that you mentioned the pandemic driving the appetite for technology. I think it also drove this kind of willingness to realize that with some effort and some investment, sometimes accelerated, sometimes somehow time consuming, there's a chance to really make to take a position, but flexibly, because the technology is changing so fast. I guess that's my last point. My last point is there's been that, a lot of these organizations that I've talked to are concerned that if they take a position on technology or make an initial investment that's significant, and the technology changes in a month or in 3 months, which seems to be happening now, is there's a rapid transformation. They're not sure. And I'm sure that must have come out in your conversations with Dan and the other leaders who are making those kinds of very specific decisions. It's now, well, how do we navigate that? It's no longer, we'll just plunk down whatever and have this for X number of years. Now it has to be super nimble, and the team needs to be ready to shift very quickly.
Yeah, I think, yes. I think one of the things that's coming up from my conversations is that, you've got to be not caught up in just as we've always said with any of the hype or any of the AI hype or whatever. So you need to, I think, look at your underlying infrastructure. You need to look at where you are realistically in your roadmap in terms of getting on top of your data, in terms of getting on top of, are you using Teams? Do you have sort of sensible infrastructure that's going to really set you up for the future, with all of the kind of advances that are coming already but are going to be happening even faster in the future? Do you have the basis in order to start taking advantage of that? And if not, then don't be caught up with all of the newfangled stuff until you are in a position to do that. I think that has to be the case, because otherwise you're going to find that you're caught with your whatever down, because and I think it's very easy to feel, we're going to be left behind. At this conference this week, Tamara Box, his managing partner of Reed Smith, was talking, and she referred back to the examples that we've heard a few times about Kodak and Blockbuster. And I think everyone, it's fair, right? So you don't want to be the ones going, hey, we're doing fine, we're always going to have print. But equally, you've just got to not be caught up and go, right, oh my God, everybody else is doing this, and then you just need to work out, I think, what your clients need. You need to start with your clients, as you said, start with the problem. Start with and work back and go, are we solving that in the most efficient way possible? Do we have the correct infrastructure? Are we on top of our data? Do we know where stuff is? Are we able to apply analytics to understand, where we could be doing things more efficiently? And then from then, if you then want to start, I feel like everyone just gets a bit ahead of themselves. But with Gen AI, the potential is enormous, right? Absolutely, no doubt about it.
One thing I would kind of close with is the idea that when we were on the virtual lunch talking about GPT, I bought a subscription, just it's $20 a month to, it's like GPT Plus or something, just to do an experiment myself. It was cost effective, and I took a transcript of something that was public. It's not something that was had any proprietary properties or wasn't confidential or anything. And I put it in, and there were some issues with the length, and I just asked it, write an article out of this mishmash of language. And the truth is, it looked like it did a good job, but because I had to take all the language, all the text, and break it up, I have now 4 different drafts of something that I have to combine. So it ended up creating a lot of work for me, and I'm not sure it was so much better. But the difference between selecting a cloud system or a document management system or a billing system is it historically that is led by the IT department or someone who's charged with the kind of a universal application of technology, and then maybe there's a committee of people who can guide and say, here, we're the users, we reflect the users. And that was historically the case with let's say e-discovery, for example, an advanced tool which was only generally used by specialists within an organization, and they developed incredible specialization and were the relied upon individuals. We are in an era now where it's almost like crowdsourcing how this should be used, and people almost coming to the organization and saying, we could use it this way. I tried it this way. I took my kids' drawings and came up with something else. I created an itinerary for travel. I did this. And us like creatively collaborating on where the use case is. I just think there's again a lot of opportunity to hear a lot of voices, which might transform the way organizations approach the deployment of some of these tools.
I do agree with you, and I don't want to excuse me, sound like I'm anti by any means. And actually it was interesting because LexisNexis just yesterday launched a new product, and there was a comment about one of a part of it is generative AI based assistant, and there was a comment made by Jason Barmore at Microsoft saying, as long as obviously we're confident in security, and he made this observation that you can't just not start using new technology because of fear. You need to start trying it and playing around with it. I'm not suggesting people don't play around with it and see what it can do, obviously within the constraints that the firm sets, rather than going off and just putting all of their client data into ChatGPT, which would be a very bad idea. But it's more, I think, and also I think what's really great is the excitement about technology, right? I think that is kind of mind-blowing, because it sort of shows you the art of the possible if you can channel that excitement within an organization, and that level of interaction and that level of uptake, and you can start applying that within a firm in order to perhaps connect people a bit better, to surface information across the firm, all of that kind of stuff. I think I'm not poo-pooing it, and I'm not sort of being a technophobe in any sense. I just think that it's important to do your thing rather than, it was interesting you saying about we're just taking stock. I think that's great, but that they're taking stock and they're not going, oh, we want to do what they're doing, because I think that's probably a recipe for disaster.
Well, the technology is giving people actually a chance to reevaluate their process, just to bring us full circle to my earlier point. And I think that's what I'm looking forward to. I'm looking forward to hearing some feedback about people who were at the ALA conference talking about process. I'm looking forward to being at CLOC talking about the process. I'm looking forward to being at Lexpo. And I think that it's probably the part of the conversation that will be leading rather than following the discussion of technology. Anyway, awesome to chat with you as always, Caroline. I love these little discussions. I'm not exactly sure what they're about, but I always find them super fun and inspiring and thought-provoking, and I'm grateful for the opportunity. So thank you.
Thanks, Ari. Speak soon.